First of all, I've reached 1,000 subscribers. Wow, I'd never thought I'd get anywhere near this far. So thank you everybody who has made this happen.
Hooray!
Right, what's the best way to mark this? By making a video on the year 1000. First of all, I'll describe how we ourselves perceived the turning of a millennium. A lot of people like myself remember the year 2000.
Hit it, boys, hit it!
There was a lot of rejoicing. It was an event that only occurs like once 1,000 years. And a lucky few of us got to witness that calendar hit the 2000 mark. And there was the Y2K bug, the fear that the computers wouldn't be able to cope with the clock turning to a different number. There were predictions of everything from the end of the world to all the electronics crashing. None, of course, came true. Predictions, excitement, fear and joy. The lead up to the year 2K had it all. And I was in London with a few friends and partied all night and didn't go home till the next morning. Yes. Humans being humans, we can have some kind of insight into how people back in later years of the 10th century saw their own millennium. Assuming they even had our calendars, dates and perception of time back then. For a start, they had the Julian calendar, inherited from the fallen Roman Empire. Everyone in Christendom, from William the Conqueror to Blanche of Castile, uses this calendar, as our current Gregorian calendar won't be around until the Renaissance. And I'll be focusing on Europe during this vid, as this is primarily a European history channel, only dipping our toes into other parts of the world when the need arises, like conflicts in the Middle East, or the discovery and loss of America, or the arrival of Asians and others in later times, like when the British Empire holds territories in China and India. But for the most part, we're focused on the kingdoms from the shores of Ireland, across to England and France, right into the Vatican and Rome. Which is where the Julian calendar began, Rome. When Julius Caesar decided that the archaic Roman calendar needed replacing. Over the next few centuries, there would be amendments to this Julian method, but overall, there are 365 days in a year, consisting of 12 months, each with roughly 30 to 31 days. There were exceptions, like in leap years, which came every 4 years. So you're probably thinking, it's the same as the one we use. What's the difference? Oh, well, it's about 13 days behind our Gregorian one. So there is that. And also, it's the way it's worked out. There's some drag. So, in the 22nd century, there'll be 14 days behind us, not 13. The Julian calendar still has October, inherited from the ancient Roman calendar, which only had 10 months. October being the 8th, hence October. The Julian and Gregorian kept the name, but shifted its position just to confuse everyone at the time. In fact, the months are pretty much the same, save Quintilis and Sextilis, that is, July and August. Sextilis being changed to August around the time of Octavian, the Emperor Augustus. Right. So, there we have the calendar. Or do we? As the Romans had the months, the days, etc. But they're not going to be using AD and BC, are they? So what did they do? Well, you pretty much had a calendar inherited from an older system that counted the years from the founding of Rome, which, to our reckoning, is 753 BC. So, with the Roman Empire fallen and Christianity spreading far and wide, it was time for a bit of a change. And so during the 6th century, a Scythian cleric by the name of Dionysius the Little worked out which he considered to be the birth of Christ, and gave us year 1. That's where it began, according to him. And with that came the Anno Domini system. Anno Domini meaning the year of our Lord, which is where you hear it mentioned in dates a lot, and BC, before Christ. And once this was settled, the years went rolling on, and now we're approaching that big 1000. And the year 1000 was a leap year, just to be really annoying. Politically, you have the Holy Roman Empire as the most powerful kingdom, based around Germany, and currently led by Emperor Otto III, who has already made a number of pilgrimages to Rome. This year, in 1000 AD, he seeks out the tomb of Charlemagne in Aachen and removes sacred relics. These relics he takes to Rome, pretty much setting up his court there. Otto is doing a lot this year, including the building of the Basilica of St. Bartholomew. And in Flanders, you have Baldwin IV. He's pretty much letting his subjects running his domain for him. You have Robert II of France. He's more a priest than a king, and is famed for his wisdom and piety. You've got the Duke of Normandy is Ricard II. He's the one aiding the Vikings as they attack England, which is ruled by Ethelred the Unready. He's been ruling England for some time now, but has been fighting the Danes' increasing invasions, and in 1000 AD, the Danes have invaded once again. Viking raids are nothing new, but it tells us there is conflict between England and Denmark. And Ethelred is the one, by the way, who decides to bribe the Danes off by setting up payments called the Dengeld, all paid to the Danish king Sven Forkbeard. Oh, and back in Rome, the Pope is Sylvester II. And this is before the Great Schism, meaning there's still communion between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The rift still exists between the East and the West, but tensions won't break for several decades. Heading further east, you have the Byzantine Empire, currently ruled by Basil II. He's at war with the Islamic Fatimids. A lot is going on over there. And then you have the Holy Land. Now, Roman control over Jerusalem has long been lost, and there would be no Christian king for the city for 100 years. The Holy Land was as Islamic as it will ever be. The ruler there was Caliph Al-Hakim bin Amir Allah. He's a controversial figure, known for persecuting Christians and famously destroying the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Christ. But not yet. This is the year 1000. None of this has happened. And the Caliph's attitude towards Christianity is actually one of peace. Assuming he paid the jizya tax that was forced upon non-Muslims, but that's just how things were back then. Just take in mind that true peace in the Middle Ages was an alien concept, not just in the East, but everywhere. Every place had its own rules, and most peace were just short treaties, even in England and France, like 5-year truces, a year truces. Same here in the East. And this was just the Holy Land, not the Islamic Empire as a whole, because you've got Caliph al-Qadir in far-off Baghdad. He's not seen many Europeans. Likewise, most people in the West have not heard of him. The Middle East was a far-off land, and remember that tales like the Arabian Nights have not yet been introduced to the West called Europe, they exist. These are Arabic tales by this point, and even if you are a scholar that's travelled far and wide, you're most likely familiar with the Arabic romances that shared similarities with Christian morality. As for further out, well, people like Al-Khadir are well aware of places like China, as the Islamic world has been in contact with them, with the Far East, since around the 7th century, via traders along the Silk Road. They're even aware of places like India. But in Europe, these are fabled lands. These are sort of lands with dogmen and other weird creatures. We're probably only hearing about these lands from Islamic merchants or pilgrims who have returned from the Holy Land with strange tales. To Europeans, the Middle East is exotic enough. It is nowadays. So tales from the Far East would have been totally alien. But let's travel back, by sea, away from the Islamic world and to the familiar taverns of Europe. And as we travel back across Europe, the connection with the East is the Holy Land, not Baghdad. And the Holy Land is linked only through biblical tales, and the average person would have no connection directly with it. You do have pilgrims, but not every pilgrim has made the long journey to Jerusalem and earned their pilgrim badge. Most travel to Rome, or other holy sites nearer to home, as there are many. And this wasn't an age of the huge cathedrals that marked the medieval period. They existed, but mostly they were smaller churches at this point in time, outside the occasional noteworthy building. So if you completed your pilgrimage to Rome, and you saw St. Peter's Basilica, you'd be amazed. So, with the end of the year 999 approaching, and a new millennium dawning, how did the people see the coming of this new year? They are a superstitious people after all, and religion would play a large role in how they saw the coming of this new millennium. For a start, you had revelations. John predicted that Christ's reign would last 1,000 years, before Satan would be unleashed and the end times were upon the world. This event wasn't disputed in theological circles, but did the 1,000 years start with Christ's birth or his death? So you most likely had the same scenario that occurred in the year 2000, with a few doomsday preachers here and there, and theological discussions going on in the monasteries around the world. Of course, when the world didn't end, there was some confusion among the clergy that is noted in later centuries. But even before this time, several scholars had questioned the date of year 1 and the birth of Christ, the Venerable Bede in the 8th century being one such person. And also, there's no year 0, which means the calendars missed out 12 whole months. There's a reason why we changed to the Gregorian. But what about the rest of the people? The farmers, the merchants, the workers, even the nobility? There must have been fear and trepidation, uncertainty, and you can guarantee Jesus defeating Satan before calling his children to the throne had a far bigger impact at the time than the millennium bug did in art. Life was hard, and people grew up fast, children worked, and the average person died around 40. Not to age, but to many of the incurable ailments at the time. Even the flu could take you out. 50 was venerable, so when you came across people in their 70s and 80s, they're uncommon. Life may be hard, but you can imagine the sense of humour being the same as people today. These are humans. They had human minds, and they laughed at the same things we would laugh at. If presented with TikTok, once they'd got over the initial shock, they'd soon be laughing at people failing at basic tasks and a plethora of cat videos. People falling over while drunk? Fart jokes? Though I don't think we need to introduce them to AI just yet. Although the past is a foreign place, there is always some common ground. So I don't doubt for a second that they were making the same jokes as we were about the doomsday predictions, mocking the clergy for being drama queens, etc. History tells us that they just got on as normal. Outside of a few exceptions, there was no mass panic, and no one was selling up their land in wait for the apocalypse. And as for the rapture, that wasn't around yet, and would not even be a concept until the 19th century. This is the year 1000. And just to imagine the partying. People in the Middle Ages loved a drink, loved a good time, loved a feast, and they would certainly have known that the year 1000 was special. And when they woke up the next day, on January the 1st, 1000 Anno Domini, they would continue on as normal. They got back to work, and the ebb and flow continued. Just probably with a bit of a hangover. They'd be back to ploughing the fields and making sure things ran as normal. And before long, only a lucky few were old enough to remember the year 1000, which was then written down in what we now call the Julian work calendar, 20 years later at Canterbury Cathedral. And this is England's oldest calendar. There were other calendars in the world, but this is England's earliest calendar, so I will give it a special mention. It depicts the routine of work, using it as a religious metaphor. It's steeped in astrology and other numerology and things like that. Each month marked with a task. Like January, depicted as Capricorn and marked for ploughing the fields, preparing the soil, people's minds turning to whether or not there would be a good crop that year. I know very little of farming, but I thought people ploughed the fields in December, not January. So does anyone actually plough in January? Or were the medieval people doing something different? Or were the dates really that screw with? Or could it be a religious metaphor, showing the seeds being shown first? The first part of life, the first part of the year. Given the readers would no doubt be monks and clergy, this does hold credibility. Either way, the ploughman is complaining that work is hard, and that he is not free, suggesting either a slave or a serf. Certainly someone on the lowest rung of society. He is not the archetypical happy bunny. Now February depicts God's own vineyard, and it's time to light the candles and clear away all those vines. The astrology sign here is Aquarius, and personally I find this calendar fantastic. It depicts regular people, sometimes with beer guts, bald heads. Also they're using tools of the era, and the monks that created this world would have known toil and soil. They understood the communities relied on this, and the world relied on this. Also, there are many astrological references throughout the calendar, and numerological, that would be too vast to get into here. Now March sees more sowing and more toil on the farm, as we see the cycle of the harvest. At the very top of the page in March you can see Pisces, which sets the tone of the whole calendar. There are saints' days, feast days, all marked with golden crosses. So there's no way of forgetting the most important days of the year at the chapter house in Canterbury Cathedral. Now in April, they've gone from working hard to hardly working. Easter is here. I'm not going on about it here, though if you do fancy a video on Easter, I can link one in the description. The picture here is one of feasting and drinking, and we even get to see a good old Viking drinking horn, like we see at reenactments or Amon Amarth gigs. There's cushions telling us they didn't sit down on hard chairs like some Puritan, but enjoyed comforts. It's really interesting. And at May it's back to work, in this case the tending of sheep, but most likely a metaphor for the clergy, as they are shepherds of God's flock. But this is the month of Taurus, so bugger knows why sheep are depicted. That should have been last month in Aries. So far, metaphor or not, these illustrations are giving us a good insight into how medieval life played out. In June, people appear to be cutting branches and loading wood onto cars. All seems nice and innocent until you notice the chap with the axe. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Axes are used to chop down trees after all. They are also used in execution, and this is the month of St. John the Baptist, who was famously beheaded. Yeah. Or maybe it's just me looking into things, not helped by the metaphor and symbolism that marks much of the Middle Ages. Let's move on to July, shall we? It looks like they've got their scythes out and are ready to reap whatever it is they are reaping. They're most likely grass, as let's face it, there are no lawnmowers and grass grows. This is not the movies, where all the fields are neatly trimmed and everything's all pristine. Not everyone has livestock to eat the grass either. And all this will be picked up with that pitchfork and put to another purpose, because it's a day and age when people don't like to waste resources. Then you get August, my favourite month. Here you can see the crosses marking the feast days of the saints, and look at the 10th, the martyrdom of St. Lawrence, marking when he was burned alive. And elsewhere you've got more crops being cut and put onto cars. Hence work calendar, as this is a year in the life of the workers, of the peasants that fed the kingdom. They are their feast days, as even though these people are on the lowest rungs of the societal ladder, they would feast, even if just a meagre meal, washed down by an extra helping of ale or cider. September. Look at the piggies. Another vital part of farm life in the Middle Ages. Big hairy buggers. Could be doing anything from hunting truffles to waste removal. Could be anything. Behind them are the handlers, with long pokey sticks to encourage the pigs to keep going forward. Probably a metaphor in there, if anything, given the time of year and the fact that summer's over, effectively, by the end of this month. Other people might need encouragement also, like said pigs. I see 3 feast days here, a common pattern, pretty much dispelling the myth that these people lived a horrid, soulless life. Not at all. They are just like you and I. It's only the culture and customs that have changed over time. We're still human. In October, firstly, look at the chap with the hawk. He looks quite well to do, given everybody else we've met. And it was the gentry who enjoyed falconry, from the lowliest knight to the king and queen. And one of these chaps even rides a horse. He must have some money. Birds, though, are the main theme of the page, because you've got cranes and ducks and others splashing around in that pond. So let's move on to November. As the winter sets in, men are gathering wood, which was vital for the coming night. They appear to be building a large bonfire, a theme we're all familiar with in November, though it's usually associated with Guy Fawkes. And he won't be around for nearly 600 years. Goes to show that bonfires in November were even a thing back in the year 1000. And then, last of all, you've got December. The midwinter period leading up to the birth of Christ, the holiest month of the year, ahead of April. Though, instead of feasting and merriment, they are sowing seeds for the coming year. But we all know they had a pig out at the end of the month, don't we? Come on, we're not that silly. We all know what happens at Christmas. Just don't expect turkey. This calendar is very interesting indeed, showing the medieval fixation with astrology, numerology, symbolism and metaphor. Written in Latin, each day is associated with a task and tells the narrative of what is occurring throughout the month, including feast days. Only my Latin isn't great, and boy it's difficult to read the script. This isn't a case of merely reading the letters, as not only is it stylized, some of the letters are not used today. So I decided just to explain what is going on in the illustrations, which, let's face it, gave us a better understanding, the same way as an illiterate member of the clergy would have done back in those times. So, there we have it. An insight into the year 1000, from the fears of the doommongers to the festivities of the more optimistic. A look at who was running the various regions. And a look, as well, into a calendar written over 1,000 years ago in Canterbury Cathedral. Well, the dawn of the 11th century wouldn't mark the end of the world, but it would mark the end of an era, as the early Middle Ages was giving way to the high medieval period. The Normans were on the rise, complete with different customs, a different language, one more familiar with the continent. By the time of the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where William Duke of Normandy wrested the throne from Harold Godwin, only a few would be around that remembered the year 1000, back when they were children and the world was different. Just not so different as we'd like to think. Thank you for watching.